Hi, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. Welcome to today's 1T.org US webinar. We're delighted to have our partners from the Arbor Day Foundation here to share some really fascinating and compelling new data that they've collected over the past year on how Americans see trees. And I, for one, am excited to talk about this and hear more about something that in our kind of polarized society that the data will show that Americans really like trees. They really like our forests. And I know me personally, when it's been a hard day, spending some time in the local parks here in Minneapolis are always a balm for my psyche. So I appreciate that they'll be touching on some of that pieces before. But 1T.org US, for those unfamiliar, is a coalition of companies, governments, and NGOs who are all committed to trees and forests as being a critical piece of our solutions to climate change, to biodiversity crises, and much more. And we're delighted to have Arbor Day as one of our anchor partners from the get-go, as a pillar of the nonprofit tree planting community and a great contributor to the 1T.org US community from the get-go. So while you're coming in and saying hi, please drop a note in the chat saying where you're from, where you're calling in from, your organization, so we know who's with us today. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Kuhl, who's the Director of Marketing and Strategy for the Arbor Day Foundation, to dive into this really cool report. We're going to hear from them and then Q&A. Put your questions in the chat. We're going to make time at the end to really talk about this and discuss. So Mike, turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us, Kevin. Just to get going, thank you for the great introduction. I'm sure a lot of you on the call have heard of the Arbor Day Foundation. We're surrounded by our tree people here, so I think we've got a lot of great shared information today. At our core, we're a global nonprofit that helps inspire people to plant, nurture, and celebrate trees. But really what that means to us is that we try to help organizations plant with intentionality. That's about finding the right places where trees can do the most good and advocate for their multiple benefits. Our focus is really around both strengthening communities and global reforestation, and just helping with disaster recovery as well. We've got a membership program of about 1 million members, and we've been active in 95% of neighborhoods across the United States. I'm joined here today with my friend Jeff Salem. He's our Director of Communications and Public Relations.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here.
Just first to set things up, so we kind of saw a gap in the data and research that was out there. There's a lot of great things that advocate and scientifically reinforce the value that trees have on our environment, but we didn't see that there's a lot of information out there seeing what the public perceptions are around tree planting activities. So 2 years ago, we started this Canopy Report, and our goal is it's a annual consumer perception study that explores the relationship that Americans have with trees. We do this in partnership with the Harris Poll to make sure everything is statistically valid, reliable. And in the most recent iteration, we asked a little over 2,000 adults 80 questions about the environment and trees. And that gives us, 2,000 is about the right number where we start to get some reliability and repeatability in that statistic. So then we go and work with the Harris Poll and model things out to make sure that we can then project out what general Americans think, and then starting to get into some of the demographics as well.
And it was really fun in year one to see how this rolled out into the world. In where I sit at the Arbor Day Foundation in charge of communications and public relations, we ran out and really tried to connect this with our media partners at the national level and help shape public perception. And we did that with pieces in Forbes. We talked about it on television at the Weather Channel and kind of all over the place. And that was really exciting to see that it was able to spark conversations that we expected this type of content to do, as we connected it to newsworthiness and timeliness. But what was really fun last year was to see how much advocacy throughout the industry we were able to sort of ignite, spur on, partner with all over the place on stages. We had some some advocates take this research and reporting and make it their own and connect a lot of the results and returns that we saw throughout this report into conversations, stories, and content that they found valuable. And so that's kind of what our hope is for this conversation. Is we're going to go through all the new reporting from our 2025 Canopy Report, but really for this group, think about, as we're sharing this, how does this connect to your work and spark conversations that you're trying to have in your spaces and places? Because we want to make this usable, shareable for everyone on this group, on this webinar. So we saw a lot of new things year over year from the original report in 2024 to the new report that just was published here in 2025, and we saw some consistency year over year. One, Kevin already kind of hit on it, is we're living in a little bit of a divisive world where there are days where it feels like we can't agree on anything, and we're still finding that overwhelmingly people gravitate towards this work. They understand the value of trees in their lives, and they want us to be doing more of it. And so that is really a wonderful piece of feedback that we're continuing to see in these reports. And everybody on this call should feel good and proud about the work that we're doing in the world together. Americans are reporting that they feel mentally well, they feel physically well when they're in natural landscapes and parks and places with trees, and they also understand the layered benefits to these trees. We also were digging a little bit deeper on some things that we found interesting this year. There are folks that have, there's misinformation around trees and what they're doing on their properties. And we tried to dig and find the reasons behind some of those, which we'll get into a little bit. We also know that, our weather systems are changing. They're feeling more forceful. They're creating more damage, and trying to connect that level of understanding back to our work was a really interesting takeaway this year. And then obviously the evolving role of corporations in environmental issues that can be benefited from trees and tree planting and reforestation. And so we're going to explore all that today. Just as a note before we kind of dig into some of the key themes that we're going to be hitting on at the foundation all year, and we think you might find interesting. The report, when you download it yourself, is kind of just articulated in a series of chapters and topics that we tried to organize the data around to make this digestible and to make it make sense for the public who is hopefully going to be downloading this as well. And so the chapters are trees and health, green access, what trees are doing at our homes, what they're doing in recovery from a disaster recovery standpoint, and then obviously green leadership in more of the corporate space as well. And so from those chapters, we kind of pulled out our key findings. And so we'll go through those here today. The first thing that I'll just note is we pulled a few slides from the full Canopy report. Everything that I'm going to talk about today, there is so much more data and information at every stop that we're kind of pulling out here and just kind of cherry picking some of the interesting things for this group. So again, I implore everyone, if you like what you see today, please download and go explore the full report, because it's really robust. And we're just sharing a little bit with you today. The first theme that we saw resonate last year that we really refocused on this year again is that idea that life is better with trees. We're just seeing that overwhelming unity around this idea that people understand and appreciate trees in their lives. And more pointedly, we saw a lot of success last year in connecting this takeaway to that idea that Americans are feeling mentally well and physically well when they're around trees. And Mike, if you go to the next slide, we're trying to dig into it in new ways because we had, especially from a media standpoint, this was probably like the leading edge of the report for us, as we were trying to generate publicity and traction with national media. Reporters are really interested in this idea of how can Americans help create wellness spaces around them. And this idea that trees and landscapes and just being in nature is actually this replenishing thing has been really attractive, and we got a lot of traction out of it all year. And so this is another new way that we're trying to dig into it this year. And what we found from the data is Americans, the more time you spend outdoors in your parks, in your landscapes, you are self-reporting having more benefit from that time spent outside. And so it's that really interesting construct that we're excited to talk about a little bit more. And again, much more data in the full report around this idea. Another theme that we're pulling out this year is we saw a lot of data point to this sense that Americans are craving even more access to trees. There's a really interesting note that we found that, you just saw 95% of Americans value trees in their lives, but one of every two respondents said they have to get in their car and drive to their nearest green space. And so, combining that with this idea that 3/4 of Americans also wish their neighborhood had more trees, it gives us that sense of these folks living in neighborhoods want to be closer to the benefits that nature, trees, and green spaces are providing. So it's a really great problem solution conversation to be teeing up in our spaces. Again, I kind of already hit on the 50% of Americans need to drive, but for the folks on the call that may be at a state or even a municipal level, and a community NGO or even a city itself, the Americans are needing to drive to their green spaces. Yet 91% of us are saying that we want our cities to be built with trees and green spaces in mind as we're talking about future development. It is an interesting point to make. Another theme that we maybe weren't expecting, but we're interestingly excited about is this idea that Americans and their level of comfort and know-how in planting trees themselves is lower than we would have expected. It offers us at the Arbor Day Foundation an opportunity to make sure that we are bringing education to the public so they feel comfortable in helping us as an organization carry out our mission to inspire people to plant trees. But this is an interesting thing that we just wanted to call out for this group. Mike, if you can keep going. This data really showed us, first and foremost, people are telling us that they want more trees in their neighborhoods. They prefer to live in a home around mature trees. They're acknowledging that trees make neighborhoods more livable. If they're removed for development purposes, they think they need to be replaced. They also are, have a high index of feeling comfortable with maintaining the trees that are already in their yards. Yet, only 1 in 5, I think it's on the next slide, only 19%, so 1 in 5 Americans have reported planting a tree themselves. And when we dig in a little bit, there is some misinformation around what their expectations are around planting and nurturing a new tree. But also, if you go to the next slide, it just comes down to a general discomfort and lack of knowledge around knowing not only what that tree is going to do on their yard, but also being a little unsure of what they're supposed to be planting, understanding where their resources are coming from. And so there's just a lot of threads in this chapter and this key theme that I think allows this group on this call today an opportunity to set the record straight and also like be a really strong educational advocate for the work that we're all doing through trees.
So Jeff kind of showed some of the perceptions that American consumers have about the trees in their backyards and around their homes. The next thing we looked at is kind of a wider lens. So what are our feelings and perceptions around natural disaster recovery and the role that we think people need to take in leadership in tackling some of our challenges ahead of us? We know it's hot and getting hotter, storms are getting bigger, and what we're seeing here is that Americans see and are experiencing that at their doorsteps. And importantly for all of our shared work, they see that recovery of the natural environments around us is equally as important as the people. And there's a profound connection between that and a link to improving the communities that we're at after a natural disaster strikes. We need to come back in and heal those communities, and trees have a central and critical role in helping with that. So again, there's a lot of data out here, I think, that reinforces this, but 61% of Americans have expressed that I have directly felt the impacts of natural disasters in my area in the last 12 months. Obviously, that's different by what type of natural disaster that is based on geography. But again, it's at our doorsteps. People are recognizing it. And it's not a matter of, do you believe in this or the cause or what it is? It's the fact is people see that and are experiencing it in their homes. And they're seeing the impact that that's having on trees as well. 62% of Americans have noticed significant changes in this tree coverage where they live as a direct impact from some of those disasters that we're facing. And importantly, again, for all of our work, 86% of Americans believe right now is the time to be replanting our forests. The famous saying we're all aware of is, the best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago. Well, what we're reporting with this data is that Americans have a broad base of support for the active planting we have to heal and improve our planet. And again, when you have a number as high as 85, 86%, that's going to cut across a lot of the different demographics. So what you see is, this is everything from generations to political affiliations to race in different regions. The one thing that we can all agree on is that we need to be doing more tree planting. We called out a few times throughout this report some different specific demographics, but again, what we're seeing is when we've got such a profound support for something like this, that does unite and bring people together. We'll get into this a little bit in the last section, but I would say the only area that we saw a significant change in demographic data was when we looked at the role and the advocacy that organizations that the people are looking to corporations for. The younger consumers seem to be advocating more and more heavily to see what they're doing to help the planet reflected in the companies that they choose to work with. And again, when a number's as high as 90%, everybody gets behind trees. And I think this is a great use case for everybody on the call here, whether you're talking to your board of directors or the city or anybody. As we think about the funding for the projects that we're all working on, we're saying, hey, there is broad American support for this work, no matter backgrounds of people. So everybody can get behind one thing, and it is tree planting. Last section that I'm going to get into here is just the role and where do people look for leadership with environmental issues and concerns. What we're saying and reporting here is that Americans are making eco-conscious decisions on their own, and they want to not be seen as doing those things by themselves. So they're looking for organizations and others to reflect those same values. Interestingly, half of consumers, and this again is across all major demographics, say they're actively going and seeking out information about a company's environmental commitments before making purchases. I know one of the challenges we face a lot when working with our corporate partners is, where do you insert the messaging about the good works that you're doing? And what this data is showing us is that you can put it out there and people are trying to find that information. They care about what you're doing to help support humans and our planet. again, not anything big surprising here, but what are the actions that our individuals are taking to make more sustainable choices? 89% of people are making some sort of decision. And I think what's interesting here is, we've heard a lot of reporting around people are environmental-ish. They want to do good. They don't always know how to do good. They're trying to make the right decisions. And what you're going to see on the next slide here is if I'm making small decisions like that, I also want to see those in the organizations that I choose to work with. So, 89% of Americans believe I can do the things that I need to do, but I also want to make sure that everybody is doing something and making some commitments and making progress. One of the things that helps support kind of our membership approach is that a lot of Americans say, I need to feel like I'm a part of something bigger than me because it's going to take more than just me to move some things forward. And again, this is an area where you start to see some of that generational information where 54% of Americans feel like they need to be a part of something. But as you go younger into Gen Z, that's 73% of Gen Z says, hey, I want to make a difference, but I don't want to go at it alone. Again, broad-based support here. 85% of Americans are saying, "Hey, I think businesses should play some level of a role in planting trees and supporting reforestation." Interestingly, again, that was a split, and across political divides, we're seeing even broader support. Independents are the third group, of course, with that. I want to support organizations that are taking steps to reduce or offset their carbon footprint. And then I think interestingly, we work with a lot of employers and what do you do to attract the right top talent? 71% of Americans are more likely to work for a company that has strong environmental commitments. So I think that just speaks to, some, sustainability footprint is not just one department within your organization, but it's something that can touch on marketing, on HR, on all different areas. So I think just the last thing I want to leave you with here is that we don't put this report together just for ourselves. We want to make sure that this data is as useful as possible to the rest of you guys out there. And what our core takeaway from this is that trees are a very unifying source of pride and progress with all Americans, and that's a really, really important thing for us to be acknowledging, especially in the world that we're in today. I put a QR code here. You guys can click on, you can scan that, or you can go to that URL and you can get a copy of the report. We'd also love to share. I mean, there's all the crosstabs and data that go behind this. If there's anything or there's any segments that are of interest to anyone out there, please reach out to my good friend Jeff here, and we'll work with you to get this information delivered in a way that is most useful to you guys. Because again, our hope is that you can use some of this data to help further advocate for the work that you guys are doing.
Thanks, Mike and Jeff, and really good stuff. And I think it is heartening to see the data behind. I think what so many of us feel is we all like our trees, we all like our forests, but good to know that we're in very good company. Would love to kick off with just a little bit more, and you touched on your partners or to touch on your partners conference, but again, like the use cases here, where this is designed for kind of telling to storytelling. Can you touch a little bit on your partners conference, and then B, different audiences for this report and data?
Jeff, do you want to take lead on the PCF?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Mike kind of teed it up already, the exciting thing about this report is there are so many different ways to splice and dice this. And it was interesting talking, at our partners conference, it's a annual gathering of our network of local organizations and partners that are really on the ground doing the work, making our communities better. And it was interesting to hear all of the different ways that this report was of value to many of them. And, one use case is organizations are, fighting for the same community grants and dollars, and with being able to insert some of this justification from Americans that the work that they are applying for dollars from is something that is validated, viewed as worthwhile and needed, was just brought another level of superiority and power and differentiation to a lot of their grant requests, which is something that was, not intended, but really a wonderful note when we learned about it.
We also, for PCF, put together some toolkits that are a little more, okay, you as a municipal entity, here's how we might, if I was the marketing professional in your organization, here's how I might insert that into things like grants. The other piece, we had some our aim is to make this a tracking study. So there's probably about 60% of these questions that are going to remain the same year over year, so that we start to get some trending data. But then there's 40% of it that we want to dig into what matters now. And directly from PCF last year, that's where we kind of identified the thread of, well, we want to figure out what some of those objections to trees are, because again, if 94% of Americans believe we should have more trees, but they aren't planting, what are some of those things? So I think that's the area, and that's the other thing that we're looking back from the whole tree planting community of like, what other data would help strengthen the case for all of us moving forward, and we want to make sure we incorporate that into subsequent years.
One of the things, and to that point, and I was wondering if you could flip back to the public health slide, because I was really intrigued by the level of engagement around and level of understanding around the public health benefits, clean air, clean water of trees. Could you guys talk a little bit more about that? And again, this is, I think, a perfect example of having the tracking data over year to show kind of a growth of that. But were you surprised by any of those numbers when it comes to kind of the public health?
I would say, I mean, last year, one of our themes was that Americans view trees not just as great green things, but they view them as a public health tool. And that was consistently reflected this year as well. It's interesting when you think, one of our dilemmas with trees is that they have so many different benefits. Like, what's your right entry point? And it's really good to see that people come to tree planting and from a lot of different areas, but on balance, they understand all of those benefits.
Yeah, and I think this is always a good reminder that wholeheartedly, everyone can tick off that trees help clean the air. But just from a more macro level, like I continue to be excited and interested, as someone in communications around this space, in how much value people see nature being to their personal health, as Mike said, and we've used this line, like, trees are a public health tool. I don't know if that was completely reframed with the COVID era, and that idea of personal health being so important and kind of coming back to center for a lot of us. But that continues to be a talking point that doesn't go away. And we in this group and in this room, we have so much to say around that because of what trees do for us mentally and also physically. And there continues to be really good scientific studies and reporting that can be paired with this anecdotal perception data that, it's like, yeah, we can self-report that we feel well when we spend time in a park, but there's also the science community is publishing like really dense studies that we can pair that with and make a really strong argument for trees in our communities, which is exciting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's one of the goals of the 1T.org US coalition was, again, to play that translator role in translating some of this phenomenal science to help gain, I think, broader understanding of the multiple benefits of tree supports.
Yeah, and Kevin, like, just to sit on that for one extra second, we as humans are always trying to put ourselves at the center of everything. What's in it for us, and why does it matter to me? And this is that moment where we can, yes, it cleans the air. Yes, it fosters biodiversity and does all these wonderful, important things for the planet and, and our surroundings and our community. But this truly is when we can cross the line and talk about public health and what it is doing physically and mentally for me. That can be a game changer if we tell the story the right way.
Here, and yeah, the storytelling is right. That's what's going to move hearts and minds is the storytelling, not necessarily the data piece. So having the
Yeah.
combination is really where the persuasive argument is going to gain traction. A question in the chat on data about company support for reforestation. About the 94% of Republicans and 93% of Democrats did support. Is it possible the overall number is actually 95, not 85? 84.
Yeah, I saw that question from Michael. My understanding is that the gap there is that there are also people that did not report being Republican or Democrat. Michael, I will try to reach out to you and I'll go back and look at the crosstabs to confirm that, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah. Well, I think it also, happy to provide contact information. And I think it also, no, I know Jeff, you've talked, you said in the pre-call here a little bit, and you kind of teased to this. You're going to be doing some more digging in on kind of opinions about corporate action around tree. Can you give us a little sense of what to expect on that front?
Yeah, we just essentially we took the same opportunity and dug a little bit deeper and tried to pull out even more data and insights that will hopefully just drive the conversation around how corporate support is affecting our industry and the consumers' perceptions, recollections, and understanding of that value. We have a white paper that'll be published here a little bit later this fall, and I know our partners at 1t.org are going to help us promote that. Kevin, we've already talked about that, and so stay tuned. But the data that we're getting back is just really exciting, and again, more affirming that everyone understands the importance of the work that this group is doing on this call today. And it really is a reminder that it's just about making sure that we are getting in front of the right folks and telling the story the right way, because it is always met with nodding heads and agreement. And as you saw that even with political affiliations, when it can feel like we're in this really divisive moment, this is a unifying topic that everyone understands and gravitates towards.
And just to give the crew here a little bit of a preview of that report, what we're doing is taking all of this data and just putting it through the lens of what would matter to a corporate communicator. And a couple of things come to mind. The first one is just any good branding is, you build a good brand by reflecting the values of your audience within your organization. And I think the second thing is trees are an easy focal point and an easy way to communicate your sustainability work. There's a lot of great work that a lot of organizations are doing that's really tricky to communicate. And we see trees as a great bridging to that. So, you can talk about the benefits of trees and people connect it. It's a little more difficult to talk about removing post-secondary, plastic waste and things like that. Like, it's a really good unifying way to connect the dots between the great work that your organization is doing and what your consumers care about.
Yeah, great point. And look forward to featuring more on that. I had one more question, but I saw Marie jumping in about, and again, this is a fabulous question for our tree folks, of the emphasis on planting versus growing, and the public education necessary to educate on the importance of not planting trees, but growing trees to maturity and maintaining our inventory. Can you talk a little bit about that and any of your data that has spoken to that topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Just to give a little anecdote, some of the work that we're most recently celebrating is, it's great to plant new trees, but there's also plenty of neighborhoods where we need to be caring about the existing trees. I think about the fires that hit LA earlier this year. We've got a big project underway right now where a lot of these, a lot of the area burned, but there's a lot of trees that are out there that are in danger and they need water. The infrastructure is gone to support those. So, that's some of the work that we're taking on, is figuring out what is it that some neighborhoods need. Some neighborhoods need just better care and pruning of their existing trees. And I think there's another area of exploration in the years in following this where people know how to take care of a yard, but they're a little confounded by tree care, and I think that's just another communication opportunity we have, where I think we can look at and say, hey, if education, as a communicator, education is something we can address. There's a lot of things we can address, but if a lack of information about how to do things is what's holding people back, that's something that Jeff and I and our disciplines can sit up and say, that's something that we can help tackle.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, and I would just jump in and like say to Marie, I love to see this comment. We talk about this all the time here at our offices at the Arbor Day Foundation, and it's in our mission of nurturing these trees. And it does, it feels like it can get lost when you're talking about tree planting in that sense, and putting new trees in the ground. And I would just say personally, maintaining, nurturing trees is truly where you are creating advocates for this work, because they get to see the value that the tree returns year after year in our yards, in our forests, and all of those things. And so, yes, it is something that can't be forgotten or taken lightly, for sure.
I guess a corollary to that would be, and I don't know how to sort of unthread this, but sometimes we need to take trees out of forests to keep forests healthy. And talking about forest management, forest health, I think there's a lot of perception that we want to protect our trees, but we also want to protect our forests too. Have you gotten into those levels of nuance at all on sort of sometimes with healthy forests, we need to take out some trees that are going to be detrimental, for fire being a perfect example.
Yeah, we certainly talk about that and advocate for that, and how do you create healthy forests. And it's not always just planting more trees in those forests. It is thinning and maintaining and all of the things. We haven't necessarily dug into any perceptions on that with this study in any deep sense, but it certainly is something that as that becomes more of a prominent topic, honestly, as the wildfire season is already before us again, it'll be something that we'll definitely be keeping an eye on.
Love it. Yeah, and unfortunately, yeah, wildfire season is pretty much year round now. So a lot of which is taking advantage of that opportunity to educate. One final question for me, and I think a question is how to translate this public perception and this broad support into public funding. And I think about that through the lens of 1T. It's that, our theory of change, that it takes public, private, and company and nonprofit entities to kind of come together and build and grow this movement. We see really strong support for customers recognizing the role of companies playing a role in making investments in trees and forests. What about public funding and public spending on urban tree canopies or forest health or things? Has there been any more data on that? And could that be something you could look into, moving forward?
I mean, I think one of the most profound uses of this data is to support it with the work that you guys are all doing. So you can say 97% of Americans believe this, and therefore we're doing this work. 50% of Americans have to get into a car and drive across town to experience the health benefits of green spaces. That's why we're doing this work. And I feel like if you're marrying those two things, that becomes a much more defensible thing for why you're seeking the funding that you're seeking. We're doing this because there is a gap in the need. Some people are not getting the benefits of trees. Tree planting is universally seen as a way to heal communities. Tree planting is good for our entire nation. Therefore, this is why we're advocating for this work.
I also think there's, when you're advocating for dollars for anything, There is a simplicity to this work and to trees. And, I always say in our meetings, people get trees. You don't have to explain why you're doing this work to a large degree. And that has a lot of power behind it when you can say we're involved in tree planting, tree care, tree maintenance in our cities or community and want to do more of it. There isn't it doesn't require a heavy lift after the fact to explain why that is or what it's doing. And so it's really about like, how do you orient around that and leverage the power of that simplicity? And this report has a lot of data points that speak to that.
You're here, yes, and underscoring the power of the simplicity, and sometimes we don't need to overcomplicate some of this
Yeah.
messaging. It is, the beauty is in that simplicity. Well, I would love to just extend my sincere thanks to Mike and Jeff and for your time, for your energy. And one more question I saw. Before we head off, let's take advantage of this. There are incredible stories that can be told around trees, ways that can bring new angles in the comms and help get media and press engagement. What's the press and media pickup on this report been? And you touched a little bit on this, but can you talk a little bit more about how it's?
Yeah, for sure. Well, on the report itself, we publicly launched it on the Weather Channel. We've spoken to it on Fox Weather. We had a placement about the report specifically in Forbes. We just had another piece on the mental health benefits that Americans are reporting in Forbes last week. And so it has been a natural center point for a lot of our public relations and media relations at the national level. But I would say even more impactfully with this report is it's like this can be its own news source and news item, but we use it in almost every interview that we make and take at the local or national level. We are always citing affirmations from this report, using it as sound bites. So even when it is not the news item, it is a support construct of whatever story we are telling in the media. And that has been really wonderful to lean on it as a resource time and again. And that's what I would encourage all of your teams on this call to be doing and using this as a secondary message to justify the work that you're doing out in the world. Because anytime you can cite a third party report like this, it just justifies the work that is going on around it.
It does, and Jeff's done a great job of getting this out in front of folks. But we have seen a lot of reporters hungry for information about what brings us together versus what divides us. So I feel like that's been a very consistent message that gets a lot of people to call back on, of like, because I mean, as an American myself, I'm hungry for those stories. I want those stories of positivity in my world. I don't want just the doom and gloom. I want to see some glimmers of hope. And I think this data helps support all of us in that regard.
Here. Couldn't agree more. Well, a couple of housekeeping notes for me. We will have this report and this deck available to all registrants next week, including with a blog post from our friends at Arbor Day, so you can dig into these crosstabs as needed. And again, we encourage you to share and amplify in any way you can. We'll be taking a break from our 1T.org Community Collaborative next month webinar series because we're going to be hosting in-person gatherings in New York City during Climate Week. So for those interested in joining us in New York City, please click on the link in the chat and register your interest to join us. Space is limited, but we're really excited to have continue a lot of these conversations around forest health, around policy, around partnerships, around innovation with our community here in New York. So join us then. Stay tuned for more. We've got some other exciting webinars in the works for later on this fall, talking about the preview to COP30, the climate conference, some exciting book releases from friends and partners. So stay tuned for a lot more from us at the 1T.org US chapter. And let me just again say thanks to Mike and Jeff and Arbor Day for sharing some really phenomenal work. Again, on the unifying things around how we love our trees. So thank you all. Have a great day and have a safe and happy Labor Day weekend.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.